happy to bring to you today a cast on this theme of mineral evolution, and that includes the minerals themselves and how they are also involved in some prebiotic chemistry. So today we will be hearing from Shaunna Morrison, Anirudh Prabhu, and Micah Schaible. And so that's a little about us and who we are, but we're also interested in you and who's here with us today. So to start us off before we really get going, we'd like to take a brief poll. And if you could answer that poll, there should be a pop-up coming up now. So just take a moment to let us know a little bit about yourself. And while you're doing that, I'll just share the goal of the seminar, which here we are looking to bring to you for discussion some research that's on the driving edge of PCE3, especially, but not always, from early career researchers. So the format of how we're doing this today is a little different from usual. As you notice, we have 3 speakers. So what we'll do is I'll introduce each of them in turn, and they'll speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a joint question and answer session at the end. So if you have questions, just hold on to them, and we can get to them after we hear from the speakers. So without further ado, I'll start by introducing our first speaker, Shaunna. And Shaunna is a mineralogist and planetary scientist with expertise in crystallography, crystal chemistry, and the application of data-driven techniques. She is the 4D, which is Deep Time Data-Driven Discovery Initiative co-director at the Carnegie Institution for Sciences Earth and Planets Laboratory, former project manager of the Carnegie-led Deep Time Data Infrastructure, or DTDI, and a co-investigator of the Chi-Min X-ray diffraction instrument on the NASA Mars Science Laboratory mission. A collaborator on the NASA Astrobiology Enigma project and co-investigator of the NASA Astromaterials Data System, and a data contributor and collaborator for the RRUFF project, including the Mineral Evolution Database, Mineral Properties Database, and the Evolutionary System of Mineralogy Database. So without further ado, you can take it away, Shaunna.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Thank you all so much for coming. I was actually just saying, first of all, I love this poll, which you can probably see up on my screen. It was cool to see where everyone was coming from. It's great to be here with you guys today. I've gotten a little bit spoiled in that I've gotten to give a few in-person talks recently. And I was just saying beforehand how nice it is to be in person, but it's cool to get to talk to so many people that maybe I wouldn't be able to be in person with otherwise. So, I assume everyone can see my slide. If you cannot, please stop me. And awesome. So yeah, I was tasked with the goal of talking about kind of what I'm doing in the overall broad theme of mineral evolution. So you'll notice that Anirudh and I have kind of coordinated our talk titles and our talks, because we work very closely together. And so I'm going to talk about some various aspects of some of the projects that we're working on. And then he's going to talk about kind of the data science side of that. So I'll start out with, I'm a mineralogist, right? And I'm not a data scientist. That's Anirudh, and he's going to talk about that. But first of all, I want to talk about why I choose to study minerals. I think probably with this group, I don't need to say that, but it looks pretty diverse actually in the poll. So maybe I will. So why do we study minerals? First of all, minerals are the oldest physical samples of the geologic past. They record their formational conditions and weathering and alteration that they've undergone. So if we're looking to understand, what happened on a planet, 3 billion years ago, minerals are really your best way to do that. And they can help you characterize things like bioavailability of elements through deep time. So I'm a mineralogist and a crystallographer, and that's really where I got started, and that's where I'm classically trained. But in recent years, I've really turned towards this data-driven approach, and that in part is because I've seen my very descriptive field of mineralogy. So we generally measure and we describe attributes of minerals that we either collect in the field or that we generate in our labs, or, in my case, for the Curiosity rover, we're analyzing on another planet. But so we're generally kind of descriptive. But I realized with all of these, data-driven techniques that were available to us that we weren't formerly really utilizing, that we could move from descriptive into a more predictive space. And as a result of this, we've been able to do things like predict the number of missing mineral species on Earth's surface. We're now able to predict the locations of previously unknown mineral deposits in analog environments. We are exploring the idea that planetary scale biosignatures lie in the diversity and distribution of minerals across a planet, so planetary scale biosignature. And we can use techniques like natural kind clustering coupled with geochemical data to predict previously unknown formational environments of mineral samples, including whether or not there is biogenic input into that formation. So there are a lot of incredible opportunities to make discoveries, right? To really move from this descriptive state into this more predictive state. And I'm going to speak about the questions that personally drive my research. And they are things like how do planets evolve through deep time, and what are the drivers behind their similarities and differences. Mineral evolution, which I'll briefly touch on in a moment, is really important for those types of questions because it provides this historical and evolutionary framework for thinking about mineralization through deep time. So it's a big component of that. I'm also really interested in how we can deconvolve and characterize the complex feedback systems between Earth's geosphere and biosphere, and in identifying mineralogical signs of life and how we can detect them on other planets. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through several aspects of our work and the discoveries that we have made as a result of them. I'm not going to go really into too much. 20 minutes is not a long time, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on any individual project, but I just really want to hit the highlights to give you an idea of these are the kinds of things that we're able to do when we think through this mineralogical lens, and when we combine that with advanced analytics and visualization, some of the things that we're able to accomplish. And so I hope if there's something here that you think is cool or resonates with you, or you're interested in learning more about, feel free to reach out. And I've tried to put papers and stuff at the bottom. I didn't always do that. So, if you want more information on any one of these projects, please reach out. And on several of them, Anirudh's going to go into a little bit more detail as well, but we'll call this kind of like a tasting menu, starting with mineral evolution. So mineral evolution, for those of you who are not familiar with this field of study, it basically relies on the fact that a planet's mineral forming environments, and therefore its mineralogy, are different at every stage of planetary evolution. So what this does is offer a mineralogical framework for characterizing all of the physical, chemical, biological, and planetary stages through deep time, right? So I really think of this as a mineralogical framework of planetary evolution. And some of the studies that have come out of this are things like, there are pulses of mineralization associated with supercontinent assembly, not with breakup. It's very clear that it's associated with new mineralizing environments as a result of assembly. We also can very clearly record Earth's atmospheric oxidation in the mineral record, and we can actually look at the offset between when the environment was being oxidized and when you actually start seeing that in the subsurface, right? So we can look at that offset of timing, and it's also been very clear that there's a strong increase in mineralization associated with the rise of terrestrial biosphere related to things like skeletal biomineralization and root systems and clays and things like that. So mineral evolution itself is somewhat qualitative, right? We definitely we're looking at data, but we're not really using its full predictive power, right? We're kind of still making observations. The things that I talked about there really are kind of making observations generally. So we started moving into this more more predictive space. And one of these projects is this realm of mineral ecology. So essentially, this relies on the diversity and distribution of minerals, which we found on Earth follows a very distinct distribution, and that's called an LNRE, or large number of rare events trend, in which, it's kind of similar to Zipf's law. If you guys are familiar with that, there are some cool videos on YouTube about that. But basically what it means is that most mineral species are rare, and there are only a few mineral species that are common, like quartz or calcite and, the feldspars. And we can model this trend and make accumulation curves, similar to those used in ecology. So if you're familiar with those techniques, you know that we can use this to predict the number of missing species on Earth. So in the case of carbon mineral species, which I'm showing you here, that's 145 minerals. And this study actually spurred the Carbon Mineral Challenge. You can check out this website if you're interested. And through this initiative that was part of the Deep Carbon Observatory, we were able to, with the community, I'm saying we, but we as a community were able to discover it's about 35, almost 40 new carbon mineral species of the 145. I'd also like to point out that we're continually updating this work, and our models are getting better and better. So we now have a newer Bayesian model that is an even better updated prediction. We initially predicted that there were approximately 6,000 mineral species on Earth. We're almost at 6,000 right now. We're at 5,600 something today. But we knew that was a low estimate. Part of the problem is, and you'll hear this term a lot, big data. And Anirudh is going to talk about this a little bit. We don't have big data, right? We're using what we call, big, or what some call big data analytics, but we don't actually have big data, right? We have small data. And so we need data science frameworks and Bayesian techniques that can account for the fact that we don't have millions of data points, right? So we have this model that takes care of that a little bit better. And we have around 9,000 mineral species predicted. We know it's still a low estimate because it doesn't account for future technological advances. But it's, but it's a lower bound, right? So that was pretty cool. We're really excited about the predictive power of that, but we were still kind of looking for something that we could use to really incorporate and display the many, many, many dimensions and attributes of mineralogical data, both visually and analytically. It's hard to look at a spreadsheet of 7,000 lines and 30 attributes and take any information from that, right? XY plots really don't cut it in understanding the complex interrelations of your data. So we turn to network analysis. And through mineral network analysis, we've been able to make discoveries like mineral relationships naturally embed various vectors related to their formational environment. So these are things like age, chemistry, oxygen fugacity, sulfur fugacity, structural complexity. This is useful because it allows us to recognize phenomena that's associated with these trends, right? So it allows us to better understand the geologic processes and relationships that are driving what we're actually seeing there. But it can also allow us to predict missing values in our data. Missing values are a big problem, especially in sample data, right? Everyone doesn't measure everything. So you can actually use this to predict missing values. We can also recognize and characterize punctuation events in the geologic record. So this includes things like mass extinction events in the fossil record and major environmental conditions shifts in mineralizing environments. We can do comparative planetology and characterize the unique signatures of planets in planetary environments. And most excitingly, in my mind, we can characterize planetary scale biosignatures in the diversity and distribution of mineral species across the planet. Another project I'd like to briefly mention, and Anirudh is actually going to go into more detail about this later, but we love this project. We think this is really cool. This is something he and I have been working on for a couple of years. And essentially, this method employs complex multi-correlations of mineral co-occurrences across our planet to predict previously unknown mineral deposits or analog environments. So association analysis is a recommender system that characterizes multidimensional co-occurrence relationships and creates probabilistic models for future or currently unknown co-occurrences. That's a lot of words, but essentially, you have all encountered this, right? This is what Amazon does when, you've purchased a few things from them and they start making recommendations to you. This is what Netflix does when they make recommendations to you on what they want to watch. They have this huge user database, and you can make a couple of selections and they can start making predictions about what you might want. Well, we have a huge user database of mineral co-occurrence. So we can utilize those complex correlations, and we can do things like predict, where can I find a new location of a certain mineral? Where can I find a previously uncharacterized Mars analog site? This is really important for me in my work. And I'd like to just point out that what we're doing here is not saying, querying a database and saying, okay, where do these 5 minerals occur on Earth, right? We can do that. We do that. You can do that in the Mineral Evolution database. You can do that on MinDat. But what we're actually doing is saying, where on Earth do these 5 characteristic minerals not necessarily are known to occur, but probably occur, right? So it hasn't been reported yet, but it's likely that they occur there. And that symbolizes a potential analog environment. So this is truly predictive. And we can also do things like determine what's in a mineral inventory at a location. And we've actually ground truthed this. So we predicted with a really simple pairwise version of this that there was a new location of wolfenite in Cooks Peak, New Mexico. And one of the MinDat folks, Aaron Delventhal, was actually able to go out there and find that and ground truth it, which I thought was pretty cool. Another project I'd like to briefly mention is relevant for my planetary folks on the line, and that is that we can use machine learning to predict complex major and minor element chemistry from X-ray diffraction data on Mars and other planetary bodies. So of course, we have an X-ray diffractometer on the Curiosity rover that's called ChemN, and we can use that X-ray diffraction data in conjunction with label distribution learning. It's a type of machine learning to predict this multi-component mineral composition based on X-ray diffraction data alone. Okay, so for those of you who don't do X-ray diffraction or don't do mineral chemistry, this essentially is the equivalent of sending a microprobe and an XRD to another planet. So this has been a huge discovery that we've been able to do. And we can do things like, obviously we can predict it on Mars right now. We're doing that. But also this is really, really important for future missions. And you can also use it in Earth laboratories. But I particularly think about future missions because basically what this means is when you send, an XRD instrument to another planet, it gives us a level of understanding of its geologic history that is beyond what any other type of instrument can do. And so with this combination of XRD and machine learning, we can push those boundaries of a rather small spacecraft instrument into something that, normally fills up an entire room, right? Like it's, for those of you who've used a microprobe, it's very big. So we're super excited that we're able to do that. And of course, we want to know this information because mineral composition tells us what was the geologic and potentially biologic history of an area, which comes back to the last project that I'm going to talk about. And really, in my mind, all of these projects that I've talked about have kind of been leading to this point. And that is the evolutionary system of mineralogy. So I haven't explicitly said it, but you've probably gotten the picture that minerals are incredibly information rich. And I think historically, we've really isolated kind of the parameters, a few parameters here and a few parameters there, but we've not really harnessed their full power, right? We've not pulled together all of their data and looked at this multidimensional holistic perspective to really understand, how the dynamic materials and processes have changed across planets through deep time. So that's really what we're trying to do with the evolutionary system of mineralogy. So I really think that this is what mineral evolution is leading to, right? This is, I think, the most important part. So I'm going to talk about, there are lots of components of this, but I'm going to talk about 2 specific components of that. And the first is that we have surveyed all of the modes of formation of all over 5,600 mineral species. So this took a very, very long time. And we really have to largely thank Bob Hazen for that. It was one of his COVID labors of love, right? It took 6 months. And we were able to identify 57 different paragenetic modes and arrange them more or less chronologically. So we now have a data set that identifies almost 11,000 combinations of minerals and formational environment. If you're interested in that data set, we have it, we can use it. Here's essentially what that looks like. Again, I'm not going to go into explaining the details of the network, but what you're seeing here is a graphical representation of the relationships between all known mineral species and their modes of formation on Earth and other bodies in our solar system. And we've been able to learn several things from this. And I'm just really going to hit some of the highlights of the things that we've been able to learn through this endeavor. So first, we have found that water, we knew water played an important role, right? But we've been able to more quantitatively say that 80% of known mineral species form through processes driven by water. We've also looked at the diversity of paragenetic mode or formational environment. So how many minerals form in many different environments? Not many. Most minerals form in only one type of environment. It's about 60% of minerals form in only one type of environment, and about a quarter of all minerals form in only 2 types of environments. There are some notable exceptions to that, and that would be things like pyrite, which can form in 21 different environments. Oh, and I think I might be freezing. Okay, there we go. And then we also looked at the role of rare elements and mineral diversity. So we found that 42% of all minerals require one or more rare elements. And interestingly enough, these rare elements make up only 1/10,000th of the crustal atoms. So they're really driving the mineral diversity that we're seeing there. And probably most importantly, the biosphere, right? We know it plays a huge role, and we were able to determine that 50% of all mineral species have a pathway that they can form that is mediated by life. And approximately 34 of those form exclusively through biotic processes. And the last component of this project that I want to talk about is very predictive. So essentially here we are, we're basically taking, what I was showing you before, we were kind of exploring and quantifying these systems, but now we can actually make some predictions about these systems, right? So we were able to characterize, how many formational environments a mineral species has and whatnot, but can we predict the formational environment of a mineral specimen? We can. And what we've done, there we go. And what we've done with this is basically take together all of the mineral attributes that you possibly can have. Generally, it's geochemical information. And in the example I'm going to give you, we are using geochemical information for pyrite. So this is a snapshot of what that looks like. So we have a geochemical database of around 6,000 pyrite samples, and we can use machine learning, specifically cluster analysis or natural kind clustering, to examine the multivariate correlations across the various major, minor, and trace elements in these samples. And basically, you can see the preliminary cluster analysis as is shown on a PCA plot. And we've been able to determine there are some clear delineations associated with pyrite formational environments. So firstly, it's very clear when you look at this, very multivariate view, that there's a very clear divide between high temperature and low temperature formation for pyrite. And then we can look further into each of those groups, into the high temperature group and into the low temperature group, and make predictions about what the formational environment is within those groups, right? So did it form in a sedimentary environment? Did it form in a volcanogenic massive sulfide environment? And we're able to actually predict, what environment did that form on. And what we're working on right now, and this is still kind of an open question. This is a tough question to answer, but basically I want to be able to, when we find pyrite on Mars, which we have, I want to be able to say, was there or was, how did this form, right? And was there or was there not biogenic input into that formation? And we are very close to being able to answer that question. So I'm extremely excited about that. And with that, I will just close and pass it on to Anirudh in saying that mineralogical frameworks offer the opportunity to explore many Earth planetary geobio questions. And particularly when we take an integrated look, incorporating data from other fields and using data science techniques. And I think that this multidisciplinary, multidimensional mineralogical approach will really allow us to see things that we've never been able to see before and do things that we've never been able to do before, like predict whether or not a sample of pyrite on Mars formed through biogenic input. And with that, I'd like to thank my many collaborators and my funders and you all for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaunna. You really brought in at least my horizons on minerals. And yeah, let's carry that forward with Anirudh. So let me just introduce him. So Prabhu's research involves developing algorithms, visualizations, and methods in the fields of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and informatics, and their application in a variety of domains such as earth and space science, paleobiology, and microbiology. Prabhu was the student representative of the Geoinformatics and Data Science Division of the Geological Society of America from 2018 to 2021, and has been a member of the data science team of both the Deep Carbon Observatory and the 4D Initiative since 2016. Prabhu has been awarded the Founders Award of Excellence at RPI. So you can take it away, Anirudh.
Thank you. Let me quickly share my screen. Let's see if this works. Cool. Can everyone see my screen?
We can.
Awesome. Okay. Perfect. Let me also move this Zoom panel away so I'm not distracted by it, and let's start. So hello, everyone. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to present at the PCE3 seminar. My name is Anirudh Prabhu. I'm a data scientist by training, and today I want to talk to you a bit about my perspective, or like the data science perspective, on mineral informatics. Cool. So let's start with why we need mineral informatics. Why is it a thing, or why do we want it to be a thing? Data-driven efforts have been increasing in earth and space science over the last couple of decades. It's been around in biology for a bit longer. Mineralogy, more specifically, has recently been embracing this multi-dimensional data science method, data-driven method view into better understanding mineral data. But because it's more nascent, the development of these methods has been a little bit more disjointed and ad hoc. So we, as a collective team working on this, we kind of believe that this development should be a bit more deliberate and systematized in an effort to explore the mineral data. And also that these efforts should be guided by the principles of information theory and data science. So in our opinion, in my opinion, in our collective opinion somewhat, mineral informatics is the next big step, not only for mineralogy, but also for the exploration of mineral data in general. Shaunna already hit upon this, but minerals are some of the oldest and most information-rich materials found on a planet. So mineral informatics becomes key in understanding the evolution of our planet, our solar system, and a bit more beyond. Apologies for, the lawnmowers outside. I'd like to also say this here, that by introducing mineral informatics, we aren't really trying to create a new subfield or, another new sort of domain for us to work in a silo. Mineral informatics, on the other hand, deals with the creation, analysis, and understanding of mineral data to answer truly interdisciplinary questions, some of which I'll present in the talk, a lot of which I really want to talk about, but can't really fit in 20 minutes. So if you're interested in this, contact me, contact Shaunna, ask me questions after the talk. I'd be happy to discuss this. So I'm going to start off by introducing a bit about data science and sort of where I'm coming from here. But what you see is what we like to call the data, information, and knowledge ecosystem. Of course, the term ecosystem that I'm using here is used as a metaphor. There's a lot to unpack here, but in the interest of time, I'll give you a quick high-level overview. So there are many important data resources that have been created and maintained, like MinDat, RUF, and EarthChem, and more. But in order for us to fully utilize this data to its fullest potential, we need to process, analyze, or represent the data in a meaningful way. This can be done visually, like the network that you see on the screen, or algorithmically, like some of the association rules we've generated based on mineral occurrences. Just FYI, as a side note, I wanted to mention that this is the network that Shaunna showed, the all mineral network. It's it contains all 5,700, approximately 5,700 minerals and the 57 paragenetic modes, which describes how the minerals were formed. And to our knowledge, this is the first visual representation of all of mineralogy. Anyways, getting back to the ecosystem, we take the information presented to us using the data and then try to get scientific insights or knowledge from it. For example, the association rules that I just presented, they can be taken to make predictions about where to find a particular mineral on Earth, for example, tephrite, or to predict the occurrence of certain mineral assemblages or mineral analog environments on Earth or even Mars. So when I usually present the theory behind, the data, information, and knowledge ecosystem, the most frequently asked question that I get is, what role does my scientific domain play in this ecosystem? The answer to that is it's everywhere. It's in every step. The transitions that we go from data to information to knowledge and back are all done within the confines of a scientific domain, be it biology, geology, astronomy, and so on. Because context plays a very important role in the exploration of this data. Another important note I wanted to mention here is that while a lot of the examples I'm going to be presenting to you today are based on mineral data, it is a mineral evolution theme after all. I'd also like you guys to think about it in terms of your own data, because the methods that we're applying can be applied to minerals, to fossils, to microbes, even to gas molecules. So I'd really like that to be another takeaway of this presentation, is that how can we apply these methods to our own data and what kind of questions can we answer? Lastly, and I won't spend too much time on this, but like research in data science has been a little different from what I've observed in other domains, because data scientists who usually have a background in fundamental computer science or mathematics applied the algorithms and methods they've created to data from various domains. So the collaboration with the domain scientist who's interested in answering a scientific question is extremely central to both their research and ours. Data science research, data-driven research in general, is very much a collaborative socio-technical system. And there's a symbiotic sort of give and take in this relationship between a data scientist or a mineralogist or a biologist or microbiologist. So starting off with the mineral informatics team and sort of an informatics methodology or workflow, this is the one that we've put up in our mineral informatics paper that's been submitted to American mineralogists fairly recently. But this is a high-level overview of the steps that one usually takes in data-driven research. Our exploration usually begins with a research question or with the general exploration of the data that may have been collected over the years or compiled over the years. And depending on how large the question is, we can divide it into smaller explorations. We then proceed with the development of use cases and forming an interdisciplinary team based on the needs of that use case, and finally begin collecting the required data for our analysis. Next, the data scientists work with the domain scientists to iteratively interpret the results of their descriptive, predictive, or prescriptive models, and thus helping the data scientists to then improve and fine-tune their methods further, while interpreting the results and answering the questions that started this exploration in the first place. Lastly, depending on the need for generalization that has been expressed by the larger scientific community, these methods can be adopted into some kind of technology like web portals, softwares, Python or R packages. But the more important thing here is for us to publish them as research products, because the publication of these research products is essential not just to the dissemination of scientific research and research advances, but to a larger goal for open and fair scientific research. Next, I wanted to highlight some of the promising questions in mineralogy, in mineral informatics. These questions are just the beginning, but what I wanted to show here was, these and many more questions truly show how key mineral data is and mineral informatics is to answer and the larger scientific questions and the advancement of science in general. And it really helps bring together researchers, knowledge, and advances in many, many different domains. And now for the promised part of my presentation, my perspective on some of the mineral informatics explorations that we've been doing. And in the interest of time, I'll just focus on 2 projects, but please contact me or let me know if you want to hear about the other projects that we have ongoing, because we have some very exciting research going on at Carnegie and with all of our collaborators. So I'm really, really excited to talk about them. So let's start off with mineral association analysis. Shaunna talked about it briefly in her overview and gave her view of the mineral association analysis and the advances that we're making. A point that will sort of repeat throughout this presentation is that for every Earth and planetary science question there in mineral informatics, there's always a data science question that also accompanies it. So in this case, this is our data science question, right? So a little bit of background, the idea and the resulting project that was created as a result started a few years ago when Shaunna and I were working together and we were discussing the big unanswered questions of mineralogy. And I realized that one of the simplest but most important questions was where to go and find minerals. This really got me thinking about co-occurrences in general, but mineral occurrences and how we can use the patterns in the known occurrences of these minerals to then predict where to find similar currently unknown mineral occurrences. So the idea that I came up with then is what led to the mineral association work that we've done so far. And I'm quite excited for whatever the future holds for this project. The association analysis method works like a recommender system where it looks at mineral occurrences the same way that Amazon or Netflix looks at the movies that you watched and then tries to predict what you may want to watch or buy next. So association analysis, when applied to minerals, looks at mineral occurrences in all localities, and then it forms what are called association rules based on the frequency of occurrences of these mineral assemblages. For example, if calcite and pumpelite are found in a certain locality, you are likely to find quartz in the same locality. So there are some metrics that help us rank these rules, which are also based on the frequency of occurrence of the mineral assemblage, the likelihood of occurrence of that same assemblage in other localities, and so on. So as a last step, we then take these association rules and use them to query our data again to make our final predictions. And when I say data here, I mean the association rules themselves. So one of our predictions, for example, so Shaunna showed a very preliminary prediction of wolfenite, right? And someone was able to go and find wolfenite. So this is one of our next predictions at a more multidimensional level. We're telling you where to go and find tephrite. So tephrite can be found at 4 localities according to our current prediction. One of them in Virginia, another locality in Sweden, and a couple of localities in Kazakhstan. So I'm looking forward to hear if people find some tephrite in these locations, but this is an example of a prediction made from this project. So another thing I wanted to mention was it's really rare that an existing algorithm fits perfectly for a research application. There's always quite a bit of modification, adaptation, and just general tweaking that is required, whether it be on the side of the algorithm or on the side of the problem formulation. For example, the association analysis method was created back in 1994 for analyzing sales and purchase patterns. So most of the research that followed really focused on how to work with larger data sets in that field. In the sales example, we see that this is what the data set looks like. Like you bought these combinations of things and you have a lot of different customer transactions. So the dimensions of the data end up looking like this. You have like 20 columns by 10,000 rows or something like that. So even if you were to scale up this data set, which is what a lot of researchers have done, you can go from like 10,000 rows to 100,000 rows or larger, but there isn't really too much of a change in the number of columns. You might go from 20 to 50 or something like that. But in the case of minerals, we have a different kind of dimensionality problem. We have dimensions like this. You have 2,000 plus columns, and you have like 87,000 rows. So this is, I'm saying 2,000 plus columns because this is how much we can computationally handle at this stage. But as Shaunna and I have both mentioned, there are about 5,700 minerals. So ideally, I'd like to get it like 5,000 plus minerals or columns of data that can be analyzed over 100,000 rows or 200,000 rows. The interesting thing is, as more minerals and mineral occurrences have been found, in mindat.org or Mineral Evolution database, they actually have up to 500,000 mineral localities. So we really have some work to do in terms of scalability. In addition to the scalability, I'd also like to increase the dimensionality of the association rules for our algorithm, because you can see that we've been able to take the next step from the preliminary pairwise analysis that helped predict wolfenite. We're looking at 4 or 5 large mineral assemblages, but eventually you want to get to more complex mineral assemblages. So I'd like to take this up, scale the dimensionality up to at least like 15 minerals in a single rule, thereby helping us understand and analyze more complex mineral assemblages. So, as I've said before, this work will not only further Earth and planetary science, but also has ample contributions in data science as well. I'm not going to go into too much detail on like the individual papers and contributions we have planned, but it's pretty interesting that every sort of project and exploration that we do, there's always sort of accompanying advances being made symbiotically. The second project that I'll be focusing on is what I'm calling the small data framework, and what Shaunna presented about the LDL, or the Martian crystal chemistry exploration. As I mentioned before, there's always a data science question associated with these projects. So much like the association analysis, this work also goes back a couple of years. And when I was working with Shaunna on the data from ChemMin on board the Mars Science Laboratory, we noticed that the data there has very few data points and very few attributes. Each mineral group had at most 200 rows. We really wanted to see if we could predict the chemical composition of the minerals based simply on the unit cell parameters of the samples connected. And while this was my first time working with such a small amount of data, it quickly became clear to me that this is a fairly common occurrence in planetary sciences and a few other domains. For example, when you look at mineral data sets on Earth, they have at least a few thousand rows, and say 20, 30 attributes, geochemical, geophysical, or otherwise. And when you look at similar data sets on Mars, these are the dimensions. You have 80 to 200 rows, you have like 13 columns. That's not a lot to work with. And with most of the focus these days being on big data and how to scale up machine learning methods to work with very large data sets, there's not a lot of work being done on small, and also what I'm not going to highlight too much in this presentation, but like sparse or heterogeneous complex data sets, which are fairly common in earth sciences, in biology, in geology. It's just very commonly seen on this side. Anyways, continuing with our example of the ChemMin data set, we found that using label distribution learning, which is a paradigm, it worked very well at predicting these multi-component mineral compositions simply based on the unit cell parameters as inputs. I don't have too much time left, so I'm going to keep going, but this is just, the small data project is just one example of some of the work that we're doing. I have a larger goal here, which is to create a small data framework and think about how different types of data, small data sets work and what kind of methods work for predicting or just understanding or exploring these small data sets for us to characterize not only mineral environments, but other types of environments. So the effort here is to create like a framework or a roadmap that can handle such data. So if you're interested, if you have such data, please contact me. I'd love to work with you and sort of just flesh out this small data framework a bit more. There are so many projects I want to talk about. We've really been sort of hitting the road running in terms of mineral informatics and its explorations. It's probably going to take me a long time if I go through each of these. I'm glad Shaunna talked about the evolutionary system, the all mineral network, and so on. But there's a lot more work going on here. So this is a preview. I'll try to come back to the slide like at the end. If I'll leave it up if you guys have questions or something. So most of what I presented here has been written up on our mineral informatics paper. The preprint is out on ESSER and we submitted it to the American Mineralogist. So if you want more information, you can look at the preprint or contact me, contact Shaunna. We'd love to talk about it. I'd also like to take this opportunity to highlight some of my collaborators on this mineral informatics venture. This work wouldn't have been possible, let alone as productive, fun, and impactful without any of these people. Lastly, I'd like to thank all my funding agencies and all of the organizations that were involved in this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anirudh. That was a really great talk for the interdisciplinary group here. So we'll go ahead and move on to Micah. And Micah Schaible is currently a research scientist too in Georgia Tech EPICS lab and part of the NASA CERVI Reveals teams at Georgia Tech. Micah completed his BS in General Engineering at Montana Tech University and then his MS and PhD in Engineering Physics from the University of Virginia. He also co-founded the Georgia Tech Explorgens Group and is the lead editor of the Astrobiology Primer 3.0. Micah has received NASA graduate and postdoctoral research fellowships, and his service work has been recognized through the Fred D. Brizzi Outstanding Citizen Award at UVA and the Research Faculty Community Trailblazer Award at Georgia Tech. So Micah, you can take it away.
Cool, thank you so much there. Let me pull this up here real quick. Cool. So yeah, thanks to the organizers for inviting me to do this. I mentioned to Becca when she asked me to do this that the PC3 is not exactly my most comfortable environment to give a talk in, because it's actually that second E, the early Earth environment is the part that I'm not so much a specialist in. Most of my work has actually been in early solar system environments. So if I had a group, it would be PCESSE, early solar system environments. But today I'll be telling you a little bit about some work that I got involved in looking at these early Earth environments. In particular, the role of mineral surfaces in creating or facilitating chemistry in these environments. So before I do that, I did want to take this opportunity, and I thought that both of the earlier talks were such a nice introduction to sort of this really broad scope of the importance of minerals. And so mine will be maybe a little bit different in that we're looking at some really specific instances of the importance of minerals. And so one of these actually comes in some of my other work where we're interested in what are the origins of the Mars moons, Phobos and Deimos. There's a couple different scenarios that could have formed these bodies. And one of the way that we look at that is by looking then at the composition of those bodies, and those compositions then being very important to what are the minerals that are going to form on those bodies. typically to determine whether a body is sort of an evolved type, and sort of like Mars or Earth, or whether it's very primitive. We can look at various trace element abundances. For example, the isotope 17 oxygen versus the 54 chromium isotope. Look at the ratios of those, and you can pretty cleanly distinguish, primitive bodies versus evolved bodies. The problem is that to make these measurements, you have to pretty much bring one of these samples back to the lab to use one of these microprobes that Shaunna was talking about. So our question was really, how can we determine the origins of such bodies without requiring these difficult and costly sample return missions? And one of the ways that we've looked at doing this is actually using this technique, secondary ion mass spectrometry, on a spacecraft, where you would have incoming ions, not from your instrument, but from background solar wind or from the Mars magnetosphere, which would then remove these secondary ions, iron, silicon, magnesium, which we can then sort of look at these various ratios and pick out maybe what is the origin, or what is the most likely formation scenario of the body that's being irradiated. And so, Aaron, you really got me thinking there at the end, some of these ideas where there's very limited data. This is one example where there's just not a lot of secondary ion sputtering data for these kinds of incident ions in these different compositions. And so filling out this type of a plot is one of the goals that we have. One of the other parts of my most of the research that I do is looking at sort of the interactions of molecules found in meteorites with the radiation in space. And so if you didn't know, I think probably most people in this audience do, but when we look at different meteorites, we look at them and we find all sorts of different important biologically relevant molecules or prebiotic type molecules. One of the interesting things about these molecules, the amino acids, hydroxy acids, and sugars, is that they very often show the same chiral preference as is preferred by life. It's really a mystery to me how people are shocked and amazed by this and talking about it all the time, because literally we're looking out in space and we're finding that the amino acids and the sugars share the same chiral preferences in space as they do on Earth. It seems like a big thing to me. Well, one of the things that we are interested in is, first, why do those chiral preferences show the same handedness over and over again, independent of sort of the type of meteorite that it's coming from? And then more importantly, related to the minerals, is this data that shows that there's a link between hydrothermal alteration of those meteorite species and the measured enantiomeric excesses, where we see that more alteration is leading to larger and larger measured excesses in these meteorite parent bodies. So that's just a really brief kind of overview of some of the ways that minerals have played into my research over the years. But what I wanted to talk about today was this idea of minerals on the early Earth environment. And so the particular system that we're looking at is the phosphorylation of organic molecules in the early Earth environment. And you might know, probably, that phosphate is in fact essential for life. The issue and what people often refer to as the phosphate problem is that phosphorylation of organic molecules is inherently a thermodynamically unlikely process in water. It's far more likely that you are going to dissociate your molecule in water than to associate the phosphate with it. And so phosphorus incorporation into biological molecules is constantly competing with hydrolysis in an aqueous environment, and in those aqueous environments being the most likely sources for some of this early Earth chemistry. The mineral sources of phosphate, to compound this problem, the mineral sources of phosphate are generally insoluble. The phosphate apatites are they lock up that phosphorus, and it does not resolvenize in water. And so it's locked up, and it's hard to get that phosphate out of these minerals. And so that is another thing that's sort of playing against this, this early Earth phosphorylation of these organic molecules. It turns out there's some work that has been done through the Center for Chemical Evolution, who also supported this work, showing that a molecule, diamidophosphide, can be derived through prebiotically plausible routes from a mineral that is found in meteorites called schreibersite, and that in fact this DAP molecule is very efficient at, or comparatively so anyway, efficient at phosphorylating organic molecules in aqueous conditions. So the work that I'm talking about for this project in particular is looking at how calcium carbonate polymorphs, so different crystalline forms of calcium carbonate, in particular calcite, aragonite, and vaterite, how they interact with this reaction and in fact catalyze this reaction of DAP-based phosphorylation of uridine in a 24-hour dry down experiment. So what is the relevance of this system that we're looking at? What is the point of this system? Why are we looking at it? Well, as you probably know, again, the atmosphere of early Earth was likely much more reducing than our current atmosphere. There was not a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere. It was really comparatively rich in CO2. This sort of abundance of CO2 can drive different rates of redox reactions in the surface minerals, and actually enhances the rate of chemical weathering. And so in a less reducing, more CO2 rich environment, you actually have more chemical weathering of the minerals around. It turns out then that in particular, carbonate rich lakes could have served as important reservoirs for concentrating phosphate. And this is because at sufficiently high levels of this calcium ion presence in solution, you can preferentially precipitate calcite as opposed to these apatites, leaving more phosphates dissolved in solution, those phosphates also coming from the chemical weathering and becoming enriched in these carbonate-rich lakes. So the idea is kind of this. You have this large basin that is chemically weathering, filling up these lakes, and depending on how much carbon is, or calcium carbonate is precipitated out, you actually get more and more of this phosphorus dissolved in the solution. So as you increase the amount of dissolved inorganic carbon, then you get more and more of this phosphate. And that's because the Ca2 plus precipitation into calcium carbonate is favored over the phosphorus precipitation in these carbonate-rich lakes. And for open systems, you can get up to 100 millimolar phosphate, whereas in closed systems, due to evaporation, you can get up to 3 molar. And so this is really high abundances then of these phosphates dissolved in solution. So why are we looking at calcium carbonate? Well, the reason is because in these carbonate-rich lakes, you're going to have a lot of these calcium carbonates forming. And so the question is, how then do they interact with the phosphate and the interaction of the phosphates with the organic molecules? So just a little bit about the different polymorphs that we're looking at. We're looking at calcite, which is the lowest energy, most common form of CaCO3. We're also looking at vaterite. Vaterite is the least stable form of CaCO3 and is opposed to this three-dimensional trigonal structure, is more of a sheet-like structure. And then also looking at aragonite, which is right in the middle of those two. At certain conditions, the aragonite will transform to calcite, but for lower temperatures, we expect that the aragonite will remain stable in these conditions. What are these conditions? Okay, so our experimental procedure for these experiments was to first take this molecule that's been shown as a good phosphorylating agent, DAP, and mixing it in a solution of sodium hydroxide and water. So the DAP is basically formed by taking this phenyl phosphorodiatomate in calcium carbonate and water, reacting it at 110 C for 10 minutes. So we took that DAP from our collaborators and then created new reaction conditions where we put in 1 equivalent of uridine, 5 equivalent DAP, and then pH adjusted it to 5.5, and added in then 25 milligrams of the powdered mineral being these calcite, aragonite, and vaterite minerals. We then vortexed that solution to form a slurry and performed a dry down experiment over 24 hours, holding that slurry solution at 65 degrees Celsius. Finally, then we would reconstitute or rehydrolyze that solution by adding back in 0.2 milliliters of water. We then centrifuged it and extracted the supernatant. So got the minerals out for most of this, and then extracted whatever that liquid form was afterwards. That then supernatant was then analyzed using liquid chromatography mass spectrometry and nuclear magnetic resonance. And then the mineral species were analyzed by looking at their Raman spectroscopy and X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy. So what did that data look like? The first thing that we're looking at here is the LCMS data showing the various products that were formed as a result of these 24-hour dry down experiments. And so these were the products that were found in the dried down solution. So the first thing that we saw that they actually pH changed pretty significantly during the experiments from 5.5 to 8.5. And so that pH change was pretty significant. We were able to confirm the identity of these various compounds using the electron spray ionization mass spectrometry. And when we look at the various experimental conditions, we see that for the unbuffered control solutions, we form predominantly the UMP species, the uridine monophosphate, and a little bit of 2,3 primes cyclic monophosphate. Whereas when we look at the solutions containing the mineral species, we see that they're actually a lot different. There's this strong preference actually for dimer formation. So it's a dimer formed at the between the two UMP molecules, as well as larger or statistically similar abundance for calcite and aragonite of this cyclic species, whereas vaterite shows a very different reaction, forming predominantly that cyclic species, a few dimers, and almost none of the monomer UMP species. So this is pretty cool. We started seeing this really big effect of the minerals on the different reaction species formed in these experiments. So to make sure that what we were looking at made sense, first thing that we did is perform some control experiments where we buffered the solution using methyl MES. So we basically put in, we buffered the solution to 5.5 using 50 millimolar MES buffer. And then on the reconstitution, we confirmed that the pH remained 5.5 throughout the reaction. And we see that when we keep the solution buffered throughout, we actually get significant changes in the phosphorylated product yields. And basically, when we look at them statistically, we see that the yields are indistinguishable from the control. There's no statistical difference between the calcite, aragonite, and the control. Maybe a little bit for the vaterite in the formation of those 2,3 prime cyclic uridine monophosphate species, but on the whole, there's no statistical significance in between those different yields. And so the pH being allowed to change in these experiments is critical for them to have that catalytic action. Another set of control experiments that we did looked at the similar reaction where we have replaced the calcium carbonate species with different mineral species. Here we chose calcium chloride, so CaCl2, which we would expect to fully dissociate in solution. Gypsum, so that's CaSO4, and then scheelite, which is CaWO4. And so these have similar but different crystalline structures to the calcite here. We can see that for the calcium chloride and the scheelite, we get completely different reactions than we do with the gypsum and the calcite. What this is telling us is that because we don't see anything with the calcium chloride, a surface is important for these reactions. Without the surface, they're not going to happen. But when we look at this scheelite, we see that we also don't get any of these cyclic or dimer species forming. And our explanation for this is that the steric hindrance of the surface of the scheelite is very, very different than the calcite or the gypsum. It's a much larger structure, having this large tungsten atom in there. And so the spacing in between the different surface sites is different for the scheelite than the gypsum or the calcite. That then leading to a difference in the reactions of the DAP and the uridine species that can occur on the surface. And so with these control experiments, we kind of get the idea that it's really the surface of these minerals that's important. So the next thing that we did is we wanted to know, well, running these experiments, how are the surfaces of the minerals changing? Okay, so we looked at that through Raman spectroscopy. In Raman spectroscopy, for each of these different polymorphs of the calcium carbonate, there's very distinctive features that are diagnostic of each of the different mineral species. For the calcite here at the top, we see that the different signatures, the different Raman signatures, are identical before, after reacting in water and after reacting in the organic solution. So there's really no change in the surface of the calcite, with the exception of that after the reaction, the surface is a little bit noisier. And I'll talk about that here in a second. Similarly, for the aragonite, there's not large changes in the structures, but for the vaterite, we see that there is. When we react with water only, we see that the vaterite transforms completely to calcite, but when we react in the organic solution, we only get a partial transition to calcite. So that implies that in these vaterite solutions, there's some interaction in between the surface of the mineral and these organic molecules that not only is catalyzing the phosphorylation reactions, but it's also having an effect on how the mineral surface can transform under these aqueous conditions. So we really wanted to get an idea of, all right, what then is happening to these mineral surfaces? And so we took a look at it in two different ways. The first being using nuclear magnetic resonance. And I see that I am running out of time here, so I'll speed through these last, I think, 2 more slides. And so what we first see is that there's a significant difference in the NMR spectra in between the pure supernatant, which I show in black here, and the supernatant plus vaterite solution. The first thing that we see is that there's some broadening of the peaks, and that's expected. But there's also a number of peaks that are present in the solution containing the vaterite that are not present in the supernatant species only. Now, this is indicating that not only is there this interaction between the surface and the minerals, but some of the materials getting stuck on the surface. So some of those organic molecules are remaining on the surface after the reaction, and they're not being removed during the rinse and extracted with the supernatant. So last thing that we did was we looked at these samples with X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy. I wanted to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts, being that this technique might not be as familiar to people in this audience. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to really quickly say that you take a focus beam of monoenergetic X-rays. Those X-rays excite core electrons, and depending on the core electron energy that you detect, you can distinguish not only what elemental species are present in the surface of your sample, but also what is their chemical state. And so this is what the data looks like for our samples here, where we have calcite in the top row, aragonite in the middle row, vaterite in the bottom, and then the oxygen, high resolution oxygen spectra in the first column, carbon spectra in the second, and nitrogen in the third. And what we see when we look at these is that the abundance of transitions associated with those organic molecules are much larger in all of the post-reaction spectra than they are in the initial H2O only spectra. And so we see that transitions corresponding with CO bonds, O double bond C bonds, and then the nitrogen are only present in the after reaction species. And in particular, if we look at the nitrogen, each of the different peaks here correspond to either an imine bond or an amine bond. And we see a preference for the imine bond, and that being only associated with the DAP molecules. We could say, well, it's that DAP molecule that's first adhering to the surface of these minerals, and then catalyzing the interactions of the uridine molecules afterwards. Okay, so that was all the time I've got. Just real quickly, the conclusions are that these calcium carbonate minerals do in fact behave as catalysts in the phosphorylation of DAP with uridine, and that the solutions depend both on the crystalline structure and on the spacing in between the surface sites for those minerals. The precise mechanism for how that catalytic action is occurring still requires a bit of description on our end, but it does look like there's some interaction between the DAP molecules and their orientation on the mineral surfaces in how then they are able to form either the non-cyclic UMP or the dimer species. So real quick, just acknowledge this work was predominantly done by my co-author, Alma Castañeda, who took most of the data, and then I sort of came in with a couple of these surface techniques and answered a couple more questions and wrote it up. Our advisor, Tom Orlando, and collaborators within the CCE, Nick Hudd and Facundo Fernandez. So thank you, and looking forward to any questions.
Thank you, Micah. That was a great tie-in between the properties of minerals from our previous speakers to their importance on prebiotic chemistry. So as I said before, we will open it up for questions for all of our speakers now. And you can do that through the chat or by raising your hand. Either method works. And if you raise your hand, we will be able to see that and unmute you. So I do see a raised hand already from Kevin Devine. I think I've asked you to unmute.
Yes, okay. Okay, thanks for 3 excellent talks. In particular, very interested in Micah's talk.
Oh, no.
Now, I once worked in Steve Benner's lab. So I wonder, have you seen the paper out very recently about the prebiotic synthesis of RNA polymers using sort of like nucleoside triphosphates on basaltic glasses, and primitive basaltic glasses that would have occurred on the early Earth around 4 billion years ago? By the way, they've also, the same group recently, I think in fact last year, published a paper on how you can make triphosphates abiotically on borate, sort of borate minerals. And I wondered, have you actually looked at, in addition to calcium carbonate, have you looked at borate minerals in your work as well?
No, I did. I caught that headline. I didn't read that paper in general. Like I said, this is not really my traditional field, and so I'm not an organic chemist at all.
Yeah.
But we are definitely, we've looked at the influence of mineral surfaces both in these experiments on uridine phosphorylation and also on peptide formation in a hydroxy acid amino acid.
My next question.
Yep. And so actually my one of the folks that I showed in that picture of our group there, Aaron McKee, has a paper out on peptide formation in fumed silica. I think looking at more minerals is a good idea. I don't think that it's been done a ton. And really this, as far as I can tell, and I think Shaunna and Arun but probably tell you even more strongly, given that they're a little bit more involved in this, but it's starting to come online that people are really taking into account the importance of minerals in these kinds of systems.
I mean, that's what the great prebiotic experiments begun basically in 1953. That's what now 70 years ago by Stanley Miller. They omitted one essential component, rocks. They were regarded as inert inorganic accessories, which that's far from the point. I think we now realize that they can act as catalytic centers. In fact, they act as abiotic enzymes in all probability. And of course, they allow, especially in deep sea vents and in fumaroles, you've got pH gradients, which is very similar to what you see in a living cell, in the mitochondria. So, but thanks anyway. And I can see certainly how you can produce diphosphates using in your work, which is very interesting. So
I will just make a quick note. We did look for longer species and did not find them in this experiment.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And Helen Hansma did in the chat drop a link for the Benner Lab for anyone who's interested. Okay, so our next question, or our first question from the chat, looks like this is for Micah as well. What is the significance of uridine monophosphate being cyclic?
So again, unfortunately, I'm not exactly the right person to answer this, but my feeling is that if I remember from some discussions, that it's a little bit harder to react and to polymerize the cyclic species in comparison to the non-cyclic. Maybe someone else here knows better.
Nothing in the chat on that. So I'll just move on to the next one. Are we closer to finding a certain temperature environment range for life like Earth biology to originally form from? Or might there be more than one option like happens with pyrite? Can that give us a sense of the amount of required gravity for the latter to form?
I'm just rereading the question. I'm not sure exactly which one of us wanted to take that, but so I think the question is basically, asking about the range of life, the limits of life, and maybe I'm not the most qualified person to answer that, but I'm going to answer it anyway. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure about. I actually don't know how gravity plays into that. So I can't really answer about that, but they are studying a lot of, extremophile environments and finding that, the temperature range of life is constantly being broadened, right? That envelope is constantly being broadened. So, the upper limit and the lower limit 10 years ago is significantly different than what it is today. So yeah, are we getting closer to finding a certain temperature environmental range for life? Probably. We're probably honing in on that, but it's bigger than what we originally thought. And of course, once you get to these extremes, you have microorganisms that are very tailored to that specific environment. And my understanding is you see lower diversity of species at these kind of higher ends or lower end member. The diversity of those populations is generally not as high, but it exists in more a broader range than you would think.
Great, thank you. I'm going to bounce back since we touched on the cyclic phosphates before that. Bradley in the chat was saying they tend to be more reactive, leading to maybe some polymerization. So I'll skip back up to the following question, which is, how do minerals help us tell the history of our universe? Can minerals help in the prediction of our universe's future? And how is information extracted from minerals? So very big scope questions.
Yeah, that's big. I can take the first stab at that if that's okay. And if anyone else wants to chime in. I love this question. First of all, thank you. And so minerals essentially record the physical, chemical, and biological processes that they went through, right? So they truly are time capsules. Now I saw that there's a later question. And you know what, maybe I'll answer the later question while I'm answering this question. You also can have, so we have formation, right? So we form the original mineral and it captures that original formational environment. And what the second question about is asking about overprinting of weathering and alteration. So you also can have overprinting of weathering and alteration. And so it's really important to understand when you're building your, your initial data set of samples, it's really important to understand what happened to them so that you can really characterize the trends that you're seeing in their chemical composition or their textures and things like that, and whether they relate to the formational environment or the things that happened after. But you can at times and often you can distinguish those different trends in the data. So basically it can tell, minerals can tell you with some work and with some insight what happened on a planet. So I think they're probably the most important thing for looking back in deep time. And in terms of going into the future, yeah, I think they can help us understand the future. So something we really didn't talk about today is the Anthropocene and what we're seeing in terms of this stage of mineral evolution, which is incredibly different from what we were seeing certainly humans, but really pre-industrialization, right? After we have industrialization, the mineralogical and chemical and many other aspects of our planet completely changed. So we are totally changing the mineralogical makeup of our planet, particularly at the surface. But, as geologic cycling keeps taking place, we're going to be affecting the chemistry of deeper materials as well. So we're having a huge effect on that. And in understanding the way that a planet's mineralogy changes in response to certain chemical, physical, biological processes, we can make some predictions of what Earth's mineralogy will look like in the future when we continue on, making all of these other materials in the way that we are and depositing them on the surface of the Earth. So it'll be really interesting to look back, come back in a billion years, aliens come here in a billion years, and the horizon of the Anthropocene is going to be very different than anything beneath it, right? So we're dramatically changing it, and we can make some predictions about what that is and how mineral information is extracted. It depends on what you're getting at. So, there's geochemistry. So these are things like trace and minor elements, isotopic ratios. You can also get information on their textures and their morphology. So the shapes and things like that, that you're seeing both on a macro scale and a micro scale. And there are lots of different techniques for doing that.
Great. Anirudh, I don't know if you had anything to add on that, like extracting data from mineral side.
So Shaunna answered the questions pretty well. I don't think I can add too much to it, but I'll go through the same three questions. I'll say minerals are around, they're resilient, they're there for such a long period of time that they pick up signs of what happened all through their life in general. I know it's like a different term, but all through the time that they were there. So they do help us understand by simply picking up all sorts of environmental signatures for all the things that are happening around them in their long period of being there. How can they help us predict our universe's future? It's a very large question. Universe's future. I think it definitely helps us understand. I don't know what's going on my street. I apologize for all the sirens. It surely helps us predict certain aspects of a planet's future, certain aspects of other planets' futures, and so on. And how will that tie into us predicting the universe's future will be by actually analyzing a lot more than just minerals, but with minerals at the center of it. For example, you want to analyze planetary atmospheres and their evolutions. For example, I'm just plugging a side project that I'm also working on, but you want to analyze the effects of early events and the changes in mineralization and how that affected the planet's atmosphere, how the great oxygenation event, which suddenly shot up a whole bunch of oxygen-centric minerals and mineralization, and how that influenced the planet's atmospheres, how humans affected the planet's atmospheres, and so on. And these are like the larger questions and the interdisciplinary explorations that really help understand or even predict the universe's future. And the last one of how is information extracted from minerals, that Shaunna already talked about, the geochemical data, the geophysical data, and all the other different attributes. I have a slightly different take on it, which is these are the different data attributes that are there, and how we extract information from it is by looking at all of these different data attributes in a big picture, and trying to identify trends in these attributes, right? So you have the geochemical compositions of a certain mineral. You also have the formational environment of that mineral. So, whether it was biology that created that mineral, like tinunculite, or whether it was simply like tectonic processes that created minerals or something like that. So combination of all of these, when you really look at the data all together in a big picture and then observe trends, to me, those trends are the information that we are extracting from the mineral. So that would be my answer to that question. Yep. Thanks.
Of course. Maybe we can move sort of quickly here. There's a few more questions in the chat, and I did see Kevin's hand go up. So Kevin, let me see if I think you're already able to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, it's a quick question for Shaunna and Anirudh. I'm intrigued by certain mineral formations that were found in a certain meteorite, ALH 84001, if my memory is correct. The iron oxides, I mean, some say they're very, very similar to the sort of iron oxide formations you see around Earth bacteria. I mean, I want to know what's your latest opinion on that? Could those things still be the vestiges of very small Martian microbes? Maybe we should call them nanobes based on their size. And have they been looked at in any more detail in recent times?
Yeah, so this is a very shall we say, sort of hot topic isn't the right word.
No, it is. Yeah, I mean,
dangerous topic that you're asking us to venture into right now. I'm aware of this. I've not really studied it much personally. The idea is that there was magnetotectic bacteria that essentially oriented the magnetite grains in ALH 8401. And it has been demonstrated since that time that there are abiotic ways to form this, aligned, magnetically aligned magnetite. And there are some papers on that. I think Dick Morris and Doug Ming did a little bit of work on that, kind of a few years following the sort of big announcement that we'd found life on Mars. So there's some papers out there on that. I'm not remembering off the top of my head the exact mechanisms, but I work closely with Dick and Doug, and so they're great people to talk to about that. I have not personally looked at that. I'm probably not going to for some time, maybe at some point. But basically, I think the general consensus is that there are abiotic ways to make these formations, and so certainly there are still people that think that it was done through magnetotectic bacteria on Mars. I think most would think that it isn't, but we'll see.
I mean, I think we could obviously go, it's the old applying Occam's razor. I know it's the way we do science, but I'd like to see, how, trying to push the boundaries back of when life evolves on Earth. There's a paper recently by Dominic Papineau et al. That suggests it was could be as early as 4.2 billion years ago. I mean, it's based on similar things that they've done, similar inorganic mineralization. So I think you can't rule out that they may be the remains of Martian sort of like I would call them nanobes based on their size, because they are basically very, very small indeed. So I would say, but of course we need more evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To quote the late great Carl Sagan. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for your question. It's a good question. And I would like to say, while is this or is this not evidence? I don't know. But I do think that it's very likely that there was microbial life on Mars at some point in its history. And I think that we are eventually going to find it. And that's actually one of the driving questions for me, is to gain a better understanding of what are the unambiguous mineralogical signatures of life, because this is an ambiguous one, right? And it's like, well, it could be, maybe not. And so it's, we got to keep thinking.
Yeah. Not to mention the recent, enriched carbon-12 isotopes found in certain organics at Gale Crater. That's very intriguing indeed. If those methane emissions showed a similar carbon-12 isotope enrichment, then that would tilt it towards biogenesis, I think, based on what we know from here on Earth.
Right.
So,
right.
Okay. Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And I think we are out of time, and having gotten to 2 questions as far as I saw for Shaunna in the chat. So if it's okay with you, Shaunna, maybe I could get those answers from you offline.
Yeah.
But again, thank you to all of our speakers. We really appreciate you being here. And for the audience, if you have any more questions, you can reach us on Slack. We have PCE3 Slack that actually I can drop a link for in a moment into the chat. And we also, PCE3 has a Twitter account, so you can tweet to PCE3 at PCE3_Sci. So again, thank you everyone, and we'll see you next time in 3 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now. Bye.
Bye.